What is going on, YouTube? Andrew Miller from Hook'emHeadlines.com and the Hook'em Horn Show coming back at y'all today with a quick breakdown of some early candidates to watch for Texas to potentially replace co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach Jeff Choate. I did an article on the site earlier this week talking about some potential candidates' names to watch, breakdown there of one or two guys that I know have been mentioned as possible candidates for this job. Just some background on this. I'm sure if you followed Texas news and football headlines that you've seen something on this recently. But co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach Jeff Choate, currently in his third season at Texas, took the head coaching vacancy with the Nevada Wolfpack. I believe that was last week. He's expected to continue in his role at Texas through the postseason while kind of splitting duties with the Nevada program, trying to build out that staff, that roster and everything, heading into signing day here in a couple of weeks. So, he'll be obviously very busy coming up, but in the coming weeks. And I'm honestly kind of surprised that he will be splitting duties, just given the magnitude of the early signing period in this day and age of college football with the transfer portal. How important it is to have at least some structure to your staff and things like that. Choate has obviously been imperative to, the development of this defense, specifically at linebacker. Pete Kwiatkowski is the guy that has the play calling duties on defense for Texas, but, Choate has been responsible for developing this linebacker core that's been very impressive this season. Was seriously improved last year with guys like Jalen Ford, deserving at least to win the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, rising up as a second-team All-American from some of the major media outlets, and DeMarvion Overshone also performing at an All-Big 12 level. And this year, you saw Texas have another All-American caliber season from Jalen Ford at linebacker. Anthony Hill broke onto the scene as one of the most impactful true freshman linebackers in the nation. I think one of the most impactful just true freshmen on defense in general in the Big 12 this season. And David Benda, another guy at the linebacker core in his fifth year at Texas, that has developed and really become a force at linebacker here in the last, I would say, 15 months or so. He's really found a role for himself at weak side linebacker and could potentially be coming back for a sixth season at Texas. And I think, all these guys that have developed so well under Jeff Choate, he deserves a lot of credit for, really how this entire Texas defense has blossomed in the last 3 years. Texas is ranked top 10 in adjusted defensive efficiency, DFEI, in the last two seasons after, having some rough outings in 2021 during the first year under Sark and Kwiatkowski, Jeff Choate. So, Texas got a big role to fill here, but there are some quality candidates out there. I have no doubt that Texas is going to be willing to spend a lot to fill this position because, again, Choate was just such an important member of the defensive staff. And for this list, I am only going through external candidates. There are some potential internal candidates that could be considered for this role. But this is only looking at guys that could be brought in from another school or potentially the NFL level as well. I know that Texas has looked there before for previous hires. Chris Jackson, the last positional coach Texas hired on staff, was from the NFL, Jacksonville Jaguars wide receivers coach. So, let's go and get into the list. The first name up is Bobby April. He's the Stanford defensive coordinator and linebackers coach in his first year with the Cardinal this fall. And I guess before I get into it with Bobby April and the other four candidates I wanted to mention in this list, I'm just going to take a brief overview of, these guys' backgrounds, why they would fit at Texas, and the potential pros and cons of Texas looking to hire them. There's only one or two of these guys, like I mentioned earlier, that I've seen that had some mention or potential connection to Texas that could be on a potential short list to fill Choate's job this coming off season. Let's go and get started here with Bobby April. April really made a name for himself in the NFL in the early to mid 2010s, and then at Wisconsin as linebackers coach for I believe it was 3 or 4 years. 4 years from 2018 to 2022. He coached up multiple pro linebackers in the NFL, namely Lorenzo Alexander, a two-time Pro Bowler with the Buffalo Bills in the 2010s. In the NFL, he was a coach with the Eagles, Bills, and Jets for 6 seasons. in the early to mid 2010s. And then in 2018 took outside linebackers coach job at Wisconsin. Held that for a few seasons. Wisconsin was really spectacular at linebacker while he was there. Developed multiple All Big Ten players. Had an All-American there recently with Nick Herbig. He was a former 4-star linebacker that is one of the best linebackers they've had there in the last decade. Wisconsin as a defense also was one of the best units in the nation from 18 to 2022. They ranked top 5 in total defense in each of April's last 3 years there, and the run defense specifically was really good, ranking in the top 5 in the Big Ten each of his last 3 seasons there. April's kind of development and recruiting prowess at Wisconsin ended up earning him his first college football defensive coordinator job at Stanford under head coach Troy Taylor during the offseason, talking about this past offseason. Stanford is a team that's largely rebuilding right now after the David Shaw era came to an end last year. And so Troy Terry trying to rebuild things there upon Stanford's move to the ACC next season. But, there were some speed bumps this fall for sure for April's defensive unit at Stanford. They ranked 132nd in total defense and points allowed per game. They were giving up a lot of points in the Pac-12 this year. So that's something to potentially watch out for. That he did have some issues with the play calling duties this fall, but they're really in the first steps of a rebuild there, and there's a lot of changes going on, and so I think it's probably too early to tell. I think the pros for him potentially being a candidate at Texas, for one, is just his development. His development track record in the NFL and in college. This is something you can sell to prospective recruits and transfers. And even guys on the current roster. Chris Jackson I used as an example before of a Texas hire that had NFL experience, and that's something that can resonate with a lot of these guys on the roster and a lot of prospective recruits, that you can develop them at such a high level. And Texas has really done a nice job in the last few years under Sark's staff in developing NFL-level talent that really wasn't there under the Tom Herman and Charlie Strong coaching regimes in the 2010s and then in 2020. And so, I think Bobby April is the type of hire that you can rely upon to develop these NFL caliber linebackers. He did it multiple times at Wisconsin, and he's developed at a high level in the NFL. And so, the argument against him here is obviously his results at Stanford this year, but he doesn't have to take the play calling duties at Texas. That is a job that belongs to PK. So, I think specifically in like a co-DC and linebackers coach role like Choate held at Texas these last 3 years could be a good fit for April. And again, he's someone that's recruited well, recruited some of the highest rated defensive prospects that Wisconsin signed in the late 2010s and early 2020s. I mentioned Nick Herbig, All-American linebacker earlier. He was a high 4-star recruit that Wisconsin signed a few classes ago, and you see how that turned out for them. And so, again, April, I think, would be a quality candidate for Texas, just as, someone in recent years that has been considered one of the rising stars among defensive coaches in college football. Next one up on the list is going to be a name that's pretty familiar to Texas fans. That's Alabama special teams coordinator and outside linebackers coach Coleman Hutzler. If Texas were to hire someone like Hutzler, that would be a retread because he was on staff with Tom Herman in 2020 as the co-defensive coordinator and I believe linebackers coach for one season. And so, familiar with Texas to some degree, and, someone that definitely has a lot of SEC coaching experience. Hutzler is currently, I believe, in his second year at Alabama as the special teams coordinator and outside linebackers coach. Before he was at Alabama, he was at Ole Miss as special teams coordinator under head coach Lane Kiffin in 2021. So that was the first role that he held after some of the coaching staff turnover with Steve Sarkisian in 2021 at Texas. But he's also coached at Florida, South Carolina. I believe there was one other. Yeah, actually, that would bring it up to 4. Yeah, so Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina, and Florida. Nearly a decade of coaching experience in the SEC in various roles, including linebackers coach and special teams coordinator. And again, he's already been a co-DC at Texas. He's found a lot of success at some of these SEC programs too. When he was the ST coordinator at Ole Miss, he coached up one of the top-ranked special teams units in the SEC, ranking top 3 in the conference in net yards per punt return, or net yards per punt and yards per punt return. So found some success there. And then at Alabama, he's coached up arguably the best linebacker group in the nation in the last 2 seasons. You got guys like Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell that are All-American, early round NFL draft pick sort of guys. Will Anderson, a top 5 pick in the NFL draft last year. And then Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell both having big years this season at Alabama. Hutzler, also at Alabama, has coached up one of the better special teams units. I believe they've ranked in the top 2 in yards per punt and kick return yards in the last 2 seasons in the SEC. So again, he's produced good results there. At South Carolina and Florida, he again was finding a good amount of success. He won the Broyles Award in 2017 as the top special teams coordinator, as the top assistant coach in the nation, but he was special teams coordinator at South Carolina at the time. And so, just for multiple reasons, I think Hutzler could be a good option if he's willing to come back to Texas. You'd probably have to break open the checkbook here. He'd probably be a pretty expensive hire, but again, someone with good track record on the recruiting trail, doing well with producing talent on the field and getting his guys in the right place to succeed, and obviously has helped produce a lot of NFL talent between his time at multiple different stops in the SEC. With Texas headed to the SEC in 2024, I think that hire would make sense on quite a few levels. Next up, I wanted to mention is Tony Gibson. He's 5th-year NC State defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. Someone that also has a lot of experience coaching in the Big 12. He was at West Virginia for a while under Dana Holgorsen. But Gibson's rise really has taken place during his time at NC State in the last half decade or so. Arguably been one of the best, I think, defensive coordinators, not just in the ACC, but in the entire Power 5 in the early 2020s. NC State's consistently fielded one of the best defensive units in the FBS. In each of the last 3 seasons, they've ranked in the top 25 in adjusted defensive efficiency, total defense, and I believe in the top 30 in points allowed per game. So he's done a spectacular job there. Big reason why Dave Doran and the Wolfpack have won at least 8 or 9 games in each of the last 3 seasons. NC State, one of the better teams in the ACC this year as well. Gibson, someone that has a ton of coaching experience at the collegiate level, I believe well over 2 decades at this point. Served in multiple different roles in multiple different FBS programs, Michigan, Arizona, Pitt included in the mix, along with, as I mentioned before, NC State and West Virginia. And specifically, if you're talking about linebacker development and linebacker recruiting, talent evaluation, something he's got a keen eye for as well. He's developed, I believe it's now developed and coached 3 All-ACC first-team linebackers in the last 3 seasons at NC State, so in as many years. Most recently, All-ACC first-teamer Peyton Wilson this year, someone, again, that has multiple All-ACC selections at linebacker at NC State. Gibson, I think it would be a really good option for Texas if you're just looking at it from the complete package perspective. Again, award-wise, he's been nominated for the Broyles Award the previous 2 years. I don't believe he was this year, but that's kind of interesting because NC State was, again, another top defensive unit in the FBS. And so, I think he would be a good option if you're looking externally, depending on if he's willing to take that move to go from play calling duties at NC State, probably for a pay. It would have to be for a pay raise to Texas, but he'd have more resources here, be able to coach in the SEC. I believe that would be for the first time in his college coaching career as with the title at least of co-DC. And so there's an argument to be had that he could be a solid co-DC, and I think that there's definitely some intrigue behind the idea of hiring someone like Gibson to fill this role for Texas. And then the last name on the list I wanted to talk about is the 5th-year Utah linebackers coach, Colton Swan. This was someone that I saw mentioned on IT as a potential candidate for Texas to replace Jeff Choate in the co-DC and linebackers coach role. Swan, someone that has found, again, similar to Bobby April at Wisconsin, just a ton of success developing linebackers at a high level. And he's had to turn over multiple all Pac-12 linebacker units in his 5 years at Utah, and he hasn't really skipped a beat doing that in terms, again, talent evaluation, development, putting guys in the right place to succeed. He's one of the best in the business, I think, among defensive coaches that are kind of rising stars in college football right now. Utah, it's hard to make an argument that anyone evaluates and develops defensive talent, specifically at linebacker, better than Utah, and does so with a bunch of overlooked 3-star, low 4-star guys. One stat that I saw from Swan is, in the last 2 seasons at Utah, he's consistently fielded 3 starting linebackers that graded out in the top 10 in the Pac-12 at their position. Utah is the only program to do that. In 2021, Swan had 2 NFL guys at linebacker, specifically All-American and NFL draft pick, I believe a first rounder in 2022, Devin Lloyd. And, they lost both those guys during the 2022 offseason. And so they really, again, haven't skipped a beat in replacing those guys. Utah, again, has had one of the most dominant defensive units, especially in run defense in the Power 5. They've ranked in the top 2 in each of the last 3 seasons in run defense. And then in defensive line yards, they've ranked in the top 3 in the Pac-12 in every single year that Swan has been at Utah. So, I think in the way of like someone that's a clear rising star right now in the Power 5 and that, has multiple years of a proven track record of development, again, just having that keen eye for talent, Swan is a great option for Texas to potentially replace Choate. Texas likes those guys with those West Coast connections. Texas has had success with Utah flips before. Mind you, Jalen Ford, again, all Big 12 linebacker, All-American, second teamer, was a Utah commit before Texas flipped him. I believe that was in the 2020 class, 2020 or 2021. Yeah, 2020. And so there's no questioning Utah when it comes to developing talent, finding talent on the recruiting trail. So Swan, getting someone from that Kyle Whittingham coaching tree, I think would be a fantastic move. But yeah, those are the 4 guys I wanted to mention among some early candidates to potentially replace Jeff Choate, and some just brief backgrounds about their resumes and what they could bring to Texas. There's going to be other names thrown around, I think, and some potential internal candidates that could be in the mix as well, because Texas does have a deep coaching staff with a lot of resources as well. So anyway, stay tuned on the site. We'll continue to cover it as more developments come along for the co-DC search to replace Choate entering the offseason. But until then, Choate's going to be helping the team prepare for the playoff, kind of finish the job he started this year and in the last 3 years. For Andrew Miller at Hook'emHeadlines.com, the Hook'em Horn Show, that's pretty much it. Hook'em.